We're ready to continue our study in an introduction to Islam. Today, in this session, we are going to be focusing on Muslim beliefs and practices. In effect, these are the things that most frequently come to the fore when people begin to think about Islam. When it comes to Muslim beliefs, there are basically 6 things that are held in common by Muslims everywhere in the world. They are belief in God, belief in angels, belief in books, belief in prophets, belief in the Day of Judgment or the Last Day, and belief in the decrees of God. When it comes to the practices of Muslims, these are frequently called the pillars of Islam. And they basically are 5. The confession of the creed, the giving of alms, the saying of prayers, the pilgrimage to Mecca once in a lifetime, and the observance of the fast of Ramadan. To these 5, there are some Muslims in the world who add a 6th, the idea of jihad or exertion. We're going to look at each of these in turn in a little bit of detail to give you a better sense of what Muslims around the world believe. Now, we have to understand that there is a great deal of diversity within Islam, and we will be examining a bit of that in another session. But at the same time, Muslims everywhere in the world are held together in a kind of unity. Muslims think of themselves as a worldwide community or brotherhood. We can think of an analogy possibly of a building that's being constructed. In that building there is the foundation, there are the large pillars that come up out of the ground, and then the steel structure, the girders that move from pillar to pillar and hold the building together. Those are like the points of unity in belief and practice among all Muslims. With a building, once you have the foundation, once you have the pillars up, once you have the steel work across, then you can finish it out in any number of ways. You can put the interior walls in a variety of different places. You can arrange windows on one side and not on the other, or make them all the way around. You can put doors in a multitude of different locations. The colors, up to you. The curtains, you decide. So you see the idea of the unity in a building, the structure that holds it together, and then the diversity in finishing out some of the details. Well, think of Islam like that. In this case, the beliefs and the pillars basically serve as that foundation, as those pillars coming up out of the ground, and then the steel structure that holds everything together. So, wherever you go in the world, all Muslims would, at least to some degree, subscribe to these basic beliefs that we want to talk about, and would agree that the pillars are in fact the practices of Islam. Now, when it comes to the practices of Islam, there's always the tension between the ideal and the real. By the ideal, I mean that which people say a religion asks. The real is what they actually do. Again, an illustration from a Christian context. If you ask the average Christian, what does a Christian do? What is a Christian expected to do? You probably would get items like, well, go to church, pray, read the Bible, partake of communion, other things of this kind. But then the question comes, all right, how many Christians actually do that? And of course, we recognize that even though these might be items that someone would say a Christian is to do, multitudes of Christians don't. The same is true within Islam when it comes to the pillars. Items like prayer or giving of alms, or observing the fast or making the pilgrimage. All Muslims would say these are obligations for a Muslim to perform. But how many do those things? Well, that depends. In some countries more than others. Sometimes there is greater attention to one of the pillars than to another. Maybe more pray than give alms. Usually more fast, the fast of Ramadan, than pray, because there's great social pressure. But in some countries, most of these things are ignored by the great majority of people. And yet if you said, what should a Muslim do? You would get the basic answer of the 5 pillars. Well, with that kind of introduction, then let's look at some of these in greater detail. First of all, Muslim beliefs. The first belief is the belief in the existence of God. Now, we'll have more to say about the Islamic concept of God in another session. For now, let's simply confine ourselves to the idea that there is belief in one God. God is one and only one. God is unique in his very being and nature. The God of Islam and the God of the Bible share a great deal in common. In fact, the Quran says that the God of the Jews, the God of the Christians, and the God of the Muslims are one and the same. From a Christian perspective, as we examine who God is and what God is like, we discover that there is a great deal of overlap, but we also discover that there are some fundamental differences. But as I've said, more about that in a later session. The second of the beliefs is a belief in angels. In this case, by angels, we mean a whole host of personal spirit beings that inhabit the universe and that affect the earth. Islam definitely believes in the existence of angels. Angels were created by God to serve God and to serve humankind. And from the Muslim perspective, human beings are of a higher nature than are angels. Now, as you think back to the Bible, you may recall that in one of the Psalms, David says that God has made us a little lower than the angels. So there is a relationship, but it's reversed in terms of Islamic thought. Muslims believe that there are angels that would simply be described as archangels. And among those would be Michael and Gabriel. Gabriel being the one, Islamic tradition tells us, that brought the revelations to Muhammad that eventually became the Quran. There are 2 or 3 other archangels. One is the angel of death. Another is the angel of provision. In addition to named archangels, there are multitudes of lesser angels. 2 in particular are associated with events that transpire when a man dies. These 2 angels are described as the questioning angels, who come to the soul of the deceased while that soul is in the grave with the body, in order to question that individual concerning his belief, his life, his obedience to the laws of Islam. So Islam has a fairly elaborate angelology. Beyond that, Muslims believe in spirit beings in the form of evil beings. Some angels are evil. That is, they are bent on working destruction in the lives of human beings. Islam certainly has a place for Satan. The name that is often used in the Quran and in Islamic thought is Iblis, I-B-L-I-S, Iblis. But they also use a term that, when pronounced in English, sounds very much like the word Satan. Satan, from the Muslim perspective, was created by God and has refused to submit to God, in particular in terms of honoring man and worshiping the Almighty. In addition to Satan and evil angels who are committed to working harm to humankind, there are other spirit beings. One particular group that turns up again and again in Islamic thought are called jinn, J-I-N-N. And again, we'll look at and lead you to think a little bit more about them in a later session. The term jinn comes over into English in the word genie. You've heard of the idea of the genie in the bottle. Well, this is simply the Arabic word that has been anglicized. Jinn are thought of as created beings. Some are good. The majority are evil. They are present in multitudes of different places on the face of the earth, and those that are evil are always in some form or another seeking to work harm to human beings. So Islam very much believes in the existence of angels, and under that category includes a variety of different personal spirit beings. The third of the beliefs, God, angels, is prophets. We've already run onto the concept of prophets in the idea that this is Muhammad. Muhammad is a prophet of God. But Islam has a wide range of thought about prophets. The assumption of prophets is a natural outgrowth of Islam's understanding of and commitment to the existence of God. If there is a God, and if God has created humankind, then it is assumed that God wants to provide humankind with guidance or direction in life. That being the case, it is natural that God would send messengers. These messengers are referred to as prophets. Now here Islam involves a little bit of complicated thought in terms simply of words. Islam speaks both of messengers and prophets. What's the difference? Well, prophet is the larger category. If you think of it as a huge circle, messenger is the smaller category if you think of it as a smaller circle within the larger circle. Prophets in Islamic tradition number into the tens of thousands. In fact, one number that is often given is 124,000 prophets. Islam assumes that every people on the face of the earth that has ever lived has had a prophet from God to bring them guidance in terms of how they ought to live as the people of God. Messengers, on the other hand, are much fewer in number. Islamic tradition usually says something like a few dozen over 300. So 300 plus messengers, 124,000 prophets. What's the difference? Well, all messengers are prophets, but not all prophets are messengers. A messenger is one who comes from God with a message from humankind, but that message results in a book. So messengers bring books. Prophets do not. Muhammad is described both as a prophet and as a messenger. Among those that we would think of, or among those whose names we would recognize, that the Muslim would think of as a messenger, are people like Abraham, Moses, David, Jesus, Muhammad. Because books are associated with those individuals. Now you may say, I don't know of any book associated with Abraham. But Islamic tradition says that Abraham indeed brought about 100 sheets or message pieces from God. The term that's used for what came from Abraham is simply a sheet, like a sheet of paper filled with instruction. Islam says those pieces that came as the result of the ministry of Abraham have long since been lost. But he was a messenger because a book or a written product resulted from his coming. Prophets from the Muslim perspective are always viewed as being sinless people. Again, you will recall when we talked about Muhammad, Islamic thought developed the idea that Muhammad was sinless. This in turn is a concept that has been passed on or extended to all of those viewed as prophets or messengers. This simply means that no prophet or messenger from a Muslim perspective ever made any sort of serious mistake in their lives. Now, when the Muslim comes to the Bible and begins to read of the lives of some of the people in the Old Testament, they simply cannot accept that what is there is accurate. For example, they might read of Abraham, viewed as a prophet messenger, and yet in Scripture here is one who went down to Egypt, who lied about his wife, simply telling the Pharaoh, "Oh, she's my sister," who in other acts of behavior was not exactly totally upright. Islam says that story cannot be true because no prophet would behave that way. When they come to the story of David and his adulterous liaison with Bathsheba, they are appalled. They say David simply did not act that way. A prophet does not commit adultery. A prophet does not premeditate the murder of the husband of a woman that he has been involved with. And so Islam looks at these stories about David and rejects them as being a perversion of what is really true. Prophets are always held to be sinless people. Another belief that Muslims hold in common is the belief in holy books. We've already said that messengers are those who bring books. And so Islam recognizes that there have been a number of holy books. To Moses, they attribute what they call the Torah, or the law. To David, they attribute what they call the Psalms. And to Jesus, they attribute the gospel. Muhammad, the last prophet, the seal of the prophets from their perspective, brought the final book, namely the Quran. From the Muslim perspective, books are an inevitable result of God's desire to guide people. The question then comes up, well, do Muslims simply accept these books as they are today? And the answer is no. The Muslims would say the message that God gave to Moses, the message that God gave to David, the message that God gave to Muhammad, and the message that God gave to Jesus are in essence one and the same. And where those messages or those books today seem to digress or differ from the Quran, they are judged as having been changed. It's rather like taking the Quran as the standard. It's the yardstick. And every other book is laid up against it. To the extent that that other book says what the Quran says, it is accepted as true. To the extent that it differs, it's not the Quran that's at fault, but the other book that is at fault. And how do you explain the difference then? Well, someone, somewhere, sometime, somehow corrupted those earlier scriptures. So at one level, Muslims would say that they are interested in the Bible as we know it. But they would be critical of multitudes of material in the Bible because in many places in the Bible, the text, the stories it tells, the commands it gives, differ from things to be found in the Quran. Nonetheless, Muslims are always interested in reading the Bible. Most have never seen a Bible. Most would love to receive a Bible or a portion of the Bible in order to have this holy book and to explore something of what it says. So, God, angels, prophets, books. I have an assignment for you before we move on beyond this. In a moment, you're going to need to touch the pause button, and then I want you to go to the link labeled usc.edu. Prophet. This will take you to some Islamic material concerning the nature and the function and the qualities of prophets. I would like for you to read this material and then post back to me at the bulletin board any surprises that you have found there, and also ask, how does Jesus compare with what you found in this particular material? So at this point, we'll let you touch the pause button and follow this assignment. As we go on now, we come to the fifth of the basic Muslim beliefs, and that centers in and about what is called the day, or the idea of a final judgment. The Quran has a great deal to say about the judgment. And beyond that, the traditions elaborate incredible kinds of stories about the events that take place in association with the end of time and the day of judgment. There are fantastic kinds of descriptions, both of heaven and of hell. Things that would simply amaze us as we plunged into them and looked at them. Islam has quite a highly developed and yet in many ways a very confusing eschatology. That is, a theory of the end times and what transpires. Within Islamic thought, there are enumerated a number of different signs that one can look to as indicating that the end is approaching. These signs involve events on the earth and events in the heavens. And some of them are not unlike some of the things that Christians write about as they talk about end-time events. There are signs that are called major signs and signs that are referred to as minor signs. One of the signs is the belief that Jesus will return. From the Muslim perspective, Jesus is now in heaven, and he will come back. However, his return is very different in nature and purpose, and his role is quite different from that you and I find within Scripture. His coming does not mark the snap of the fingers end of things, but rather is one step in a longer process leading to the judgment. Jesus, it is said, will come and will lead in the conversion of the world to Islam. Remember, from a Muslim perspective, Jesus is a messenger of God, a messenger who had a message, the essence of which is the same as the message of Muhammad. Islamic tradition says that when Jesus comes, two of the things he will do are kill all of the pigs and break all of the crosses. Now, the idea of breaking all of the crosses is meant to suggest that Jesus will come and will confront those who have said that he, Jesus, died on a cross and arose from the dead, and he will break those crosses, in effect saying, that is not the case, that did not happen, this is a lie. And thus, he will set the Christian straight in terms of their understanding of who he is, and assist in bringing them into submission to Islam. In terms of the coming of the Day of Judgment, not only are there these signs, but Islamic tradition then talks about a series of trumpets that will be sounded, and on the third trumpet, the dead will be raised. The dead then will all come eventually before God, and the books will be opened, and the accounts of their lives will be read, and the works that they have done will be weighed, the good over against the bad. And so you often have the image of an old-style scale with two baskets, in which the good deeds are placed in one and the bad deeds are placed in the other. And then there is the time of noting whether the tilt is in the direction of more good than bad or more bad than good. In effect, the judgment is on the basis of one's works. People are called to give an answer for what they have done. And in turn then, they are pushed forward either into a heaven or a hell. A hell that is described in terrible terms of endless fire, of burning sulfur, of molten lead, of people's skins burning off of them only to have their skin reattached so that it might burn off again. Heaven, on the other hand, is described in wondrous terms of a garden, a place of quiet, a place of water, a place of pleasure, the exact opposite in every degree of that which is thought of as involving hell. So, the judgment, a basic belief of Muslims. I have another assignment for you. In a moment, you need to hit the pause button, and you need to go to the link db.islam, and you need to enter the word judgment, and then explore the material that comes up. When you have done that, then you need to go to another link that is entitled Sil Confusion, SILCONFUSION, and explore the materials that you will find there. Out of these two sites, then post back to me something of what you've discovered in the description of the Day of Judgment and the signs associated with that day. To what extent are they similar to Christian thought? To what extent are they different? These you post back to me at the bulletin board. As we come now to the last of the basic beliefs, we've touched on God, angels, prophets, books, the day or judgment, and now the sixth of the beliefs has to do with the decrees of God. That is, Muslims everywhere emphasize that God is sovereign. He is the absolute Lord of the heavens and the earth. And thus he is the one that arranges the basic events that flow in life. In some parts of the Muslim world, this belief in the decrees of God becomes a very strong kind of belief in predestination. In other words, God is seen as arranging everything that transpires in life. In Islamic thought, centuries ago, there was a great debate over the degree to which people have freedom of will on the one hand, and on the other hand, the degree to which God arranges and orders all things. That debate was settled more or less in favor of the predestinarian position, that is, God arranging the events on earth. In the latter part of the last century and into this century, the debate has been reopened. And a number of Muslims who are more progressive and Western in their thinking are again championing the idea of an extensive realm of freedom of will for human beings. For they say, unless that exists, how can there be a judgment in which people are held accountable for having done what they did in life? If they could not do otherwise, how is it just to punish them? So the debate has been engaged again. But for many Muslims, the idea of the decree of God, at least in multitudes of realms in life, is tremendously important. It is assumed that on a particular night during the month of Ramadan, a night called the Night of Power, that God ordains those things that will transpire within the coming year. One of the most common expressions that Muslims use could be translated, if God wills. And behind that is the sense that God does will, and the if is not a question, does he will or does he not will, but it is pointing to the fact that we don't know necessarily what he wills until it occurs. So if he wills that I do this or that, then it will come to pass. I have another assignment for you to post back to me. I want you to think, what 5 or 6 basic core beliefs would you list as somehow forming an expression of that which stands at the heart and core of biblical faith? If Muslim belief can be summarized basically in 6 things, then what 5 or 6 things would you choose to say this summarizes the essence of what the Christian faith is all about? Post that to me. We now shift to links. We now shift to practices, and there is a link to which you can go at your convenience, where you will find a summary chart. In fact, 2 summary charts. One of which is labeled beliefs, and the second of which is labeled pillars. These simply outline for you the essence of these items that we've been addressed. As we come to the practices of Islam, we've noted that they basically are 5. The first is the creed. The creed says there is no God but God, and Muhammad is the messenger of God. This is the embodiment of the essence of Islamic faith. Muslims make this statement on innumerable occasions. It is a part of their regular conversation. It is the words first spoken into the ears of a baby born into a devout Muslim family. It is that which one says in Arabic with intention of heart that makes one a Muslim. How do you become a Muslim? You recite the creed in Arabic with the intention or truthfulness of your belief in it. Then, the second of the pillars has to do with prayer. Again, you will find a link entitled Prayer and another entitled Themes of Prayer that will help you explore a little farther the things that are involved in Muslim prayer. When we think of prayer in Islam, we usually think of those pictures that we see of people standing shoulder to shoulder, row after row, facing in a common direction, standing, bowing, kneeling, touching their heads to the ground, performing prayer. This is a major aspect of Islamic prayer. But it's not the only way Muslims pray. There also is prayer that is called spontaneous or extemporaneous prayer. In that case, the Muslim could be standing, could be sitting on the floor, could be in any physical position. But the prayer is usually offered with eyes open, looking heavenward, hands extended and open, as if to say, "O God, I am beseeching you for certain things. My hands are open to receive from you what you would send unto me." So Muslims do pray spontaneously. However, back to the prayers where people are lined up row on row. This kind of prayer is what we could label liturgical prayer. It is fixed, it is arranged. There are to be really no particular changes that are to take place in the way this sort of prayer is done. Before one prays these prayers, there is a process of purification, of washing. An Islamic tradition tells people exactly how to wash: hands, arms up to the elbow, face, head, feet, in order that one might come before God pure. Now, the very devout Muslim would say this is more than simply washing off dirt. It is a symbolic act in which the Muslim is acknowledging the need to be clean, not only of body, but of heart and mind in coming to God. So the process of washing is a necessary part of preparation for prayer. Then, as the Muslim comes together to pray, they are always facing in the direction of Mecca, from wherever they are on the face of the earth. In their prayers, they go through a set liturgy or ritual, namely one of standing in a certain way and saying certain words. And the posture that one adopts in standing or bowing or kneeling, and the words that one says when upright or bowed or on their knees, are synchronized. There is no variation, no change. It would rather be like repeating the Lord's Prayer: "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name," and so forth. We do not alter the words in that prayer. They simply flow in a given way. We simply do not have any physical posture that we associate with that. Muslims are to pray in this manner 5 times every day. And those hours of prayer are regularly fixed, and each of those 5 times has its own particular name. So that the Muslim, in referring to the early morning prayer somewhere after 5 a.m., can simply speak the word, and everyone understands, oh, he's talking about the first prayer of the day or the middle prayer of the day. Muslims look at these prayers as being a mercy or a grace given to them by God. The devout Muslim who actually does these sorts of things is thus never far from a conscious remembrance of God. And the devout Muslim would say this is precisely why God has ordered this kind of prayer process. Again, I have an assignment for you in which you will have to hit the pause button. When you do that, then you're going to USC EDU, and you're going to look under prayer. Read that material and then post back to me any comparison and contrast you see in this Muslim description of prayer with what you know of prayer in the Bible. Are there any surprises there? And beyond that, what can we learn from Muslims regarding prayer? Post that to me. The next pillar that we look at is called alms. There's a difficulty in determining exactly what word to use in English. Sometimes people will refer to it as a poor tax. But Muslims object. It's not really a tax. Sometimes people will say, well, it's charity. But Muslims would object, saying, no, it's not really charity. Charity is something else. The matter of alms involves the giving of 2.5% of one's gross income. It is not to be done simply as a charitable act. Charity is in addition to and beyond that. It is not a tax. But rather, it's sort of like an Islamic Social Security. It's a case of this money being collected and utilized by an Islamic association, which sometimes is a portion of a government. If you are in an Islamic country and have different ministries or departments of government as arranged under Islamic law. This money is collected and in turn is intended to be distributed in such a way as to help those who are in grinding need. Now, Islam assumes that there always are going to be rich people and there always are going to be poor people, and that the differences in economic class is somehow a part of the arrangement of God for human life on earth. God, having arranged things that way, then challenges those who have to give a small portion of what they have in order to relieve some of the difficulty of the very, very poor. Thus, the practice of giving alms. The fourth pillar is fasting. This is sometimes thought of as being associated with the month called Ramadan. Ramadan is a month in the Islamic calendar. And the fast and the month of Ramadan basically become synonymous. This is a month-long fast in which people abstain from food and drink and sexual contact with one another during the daylight hours. The way one determines the beginning of the fast, the tradition says, is you hold out a black thread and a white thread. And when you can distinguish the black thread from the white thread in the early dawn light, the fast begins. In the evening, the fast is over when you hold out a black thread and a white thread, and in the coming darkness, you can no longer distinguish between them. The fast at that point is broken. Today in most Muslim countries, the beginning of the fast and the end of the fast on a given day are announced on the radio or proclaimed or demonstrated through the sounding of sirens or other means so that people don't have to run around holding out black and white threads. This fast is intended as a spiritual exercise in which the Muslim learns to discipline his or her body and learns something about charity to others. It is permissible during the month of Ramadan for the Muslim to eat at night. But the assumption is that a great deal of food and money will in fact be saved as the result of fasting through the day. And some of that benefit in terms of saved food and or saved money will be shared with others in order to, again, assist those who are less well off economically. In point of fact, in most cases in the Muslim world where the fast occurs, people wind up eating an even larger portion of food at night than they would when life goes on in its regular way with the 3 meals during the day. Nonetheless, Muslims in this regard are exercising a great deal of spiritual discipline. How many of us have ever fasted at all? How many of us have ever fasted a week? How many of us have ever fasted a month, going without food and any kind of liquid during the daylight hours? The fifth pillar is the pilgrimage. This is an obligation incumbent upon every Muslim that sometime in their life they will make a journey to the holy city of Mecca in Saudi Arabia if they are able. Now, there is an if in regard to this pillar. It is assumed that the individual has sufficient health and sufficient financial resources in order to make the journey. The journey to Mecca on pilgrimage is usually done in the last month of the Islamic calendar. And in these days, with ease of travel, millions of people wind up being in and around Mecca on this particular occasion. While there, the pilgrim is guided through a series of activities. The whole pilgrimage, in effect, is programmed. There are visits to the central mosque and the Kaaba, or the cubicle in the middle of the mosque, that is the place that Muhammad cleansed of idols in the year 630 when he entered Mecca. There is a visit to a well traditionally associated with Hagar, and activities that involve stoning pillars of salt that serve as a symbolic gesture of repudiating the devil. In other words, what one does is programmed out precisely. Muslims testify that participating in the pilgrimage does as much as anything in life to create among them a great sense of a worldwide community. So the five pillars. The sixth that some add is jihad. And I think, as I mentioned at the beginning of this session, we'll talk a bit more about jihad in a later session. I have an assignment for you and a link to point you to. The link involves a chart that you can pull up, look at, and print out if you will. It is simply labeled Amir, A-M-I-R, Ali, A-L-I. And it will give you an even more complex picture of what's involved from the devout Muslim's perspective in following the practices and the beliefs of Islam. The assignment is this, and you need to post it to me, please. What social and religious benefits might come from observing the pillars of Islam? And, in turn, do Christians have any activities that serve similar functions in terms of Christian belief and the forming of Christian community around the world? What do you think? What would you include in that arena?